Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandom at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. On January 28th, 1896, Walter Arnold became the first known driver to receive a ticket, first scorching the earth through paddock wood at a blistering 8 miles per hour. However, it is widely believed that the first issued paper ticket to a driver for speeding occurred in Dayton, Ohio in 1904 to a driver named Harry Myers, a city that also hosted the first ever NFL game. Now, receiving tickets when you have the blue lights flashing in your rearview might not be cool. However, the tickets we get for the right to enter a sporting event can get our hearts pumping for the right reason, unless you're a Lions fan like me, maybe. And speaking of driving, this week's guest has essentially given us all the keys to our own DeLorean, in our hearts that is, through tickets and programs by creating a company called Row 1 Sports.
Welcome to the Football History Dude podcast, where each episode is a journey back in time to learn about the rich history of the NFL. Your host is Arnie Chapman. Football is his passion, and he wants you to come along with him to explore the yesteryear of the gridiron. So hop on board his DeLorean and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour.
This time, as we step off the DeLorean, the date is November 18th, 1876, to witness a historic, air quotes here, football game between Harvard and Yale, including some, well, we'll call it important people out there, like Walter Camp, for instance. But we'll get into that in the interview. Because the reason that we're able to dial in the right coordinates to this game is thanks to this week's guest, Ray Durbin. Ray is the founder of your new favorite sports merchandising brand, which is Row 1 Brand. This game is the oldest program reproduction on the site, and there are over 4,700 more, with the collection growing all the time. Before we get into this interview, here's the About Us section from the website. Row 1 Brand honors the greatest sports artists of all time. Row 1 has the nation's best digitally restored historic sports art collection and a jaw-dropping amount of framed sports print collection that includes vintage sports tickets, stub reproduction, wall art, and program cover art reproductions done by the greatest sports artists from the 20th century. Since 2013, Row 1 Brand has been providing sports fans unique vintage sports ticket stub reproduction wall art and historic canvas sport art. Row 1 sports ticket art has been featured on Forbes.com as well as in numerous other print and online publications. And I'll tell you what, to learn more about this company, you can head to the page for this episode on Sports History Network. The easiest way to get there is sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. That's ROWONE. And while you're there, you'll notice a cool giveaway from Ray and the team of Row 1 Brand. He's going to give one lucky winner their favorite artwork from the site and have it printed on one of the products on the store. To enter the contest directly, you can head to, well, you might have guessed it, sportshistorynetwork.com/contest. And speaking of contests and nostalgia of Southern football, well, let's go ahead and check this one out too. We're giving away free digital copies of Under the Stadium Lights on the contest page as well. Here's a little more about that movie. Now on digital, Milo Gibson and Lawrence Fishburne star in Under the Stadium Lights, an inspirational true story of a small-town high school football team who fought to beat the odds to turn their lives around and win their state championship. Score your copy of Under the Stadium Lights, buy or rent it today. Rated PG-13 from Paramount Pictures. With that, this is one of my longer episodes, so let's get right into the interview with the founder of Row 1 Brand, Mr. Ray Durbin. Like I was telling you before, I'm not really sure how I even found your site. I couldn't remember like the moment, but I do remember when I first went on there. I'm like looking through there, and I'm like, wow, this is a unique idea. Very cool. So why don't you take me back to that? We'll call it eureka moment when you first realized you're going to start Row One Brand.
Basically, I have always been a sports fan, whether it's football, baseball, basketball. And fortunately, over the years, I've had an opportunity to watch a lot of different teams in person. I went to University of Oklahoma for undergraduate school. Then I was in the service for a while. Went down to University of Texas after I got out of service for law school. So I was always able to kind of follow Oklahoma, University of Texas. Of course, I grew up around the Detroit area, a small town just north of Detroit. So I was always a big Detroit Lions fan and Detroit Tigers fan. And I also had an opportunity to, I was always a big Los Angeles Rams fan too. But at any rate, so I've always been interested in the sports. And one day around 2011, I was looking at an OU ticket that had, I'm not saying it was from 2011, but that's when it occurred. I was looking at an old University of Oklahoma football ticket that had some artwork from earlier in time that they had reproduced on that recent ticket from like 1930s or so. I thought, that's a good idea. I wonder what it would look like if you looked for some old tickets and blew them up because the artwork was so good on that one ticket and see what it would look like. So I did that with a couple of different tickets. I think one of the first ones was a 1956 Notre Dame University of Oklahoma game that was in South Bend, Indiana. And basically that had a diagram of the stadium on it and everything, and or outside view of the stadium, a drawing. And it made a pretty good piece of artwork when he blew it up and framed it. And so from there, it just progressed, acquiring various tickets, and then started out with college football and then programs, and then expanded into professional football, NFL, baseball, hockey. So we have pretty much every sport, soccer, Indy 500 race, old tickets from Indy 500, horse racing, Kentucky Derby, all those. But that's how it got started, and it just kind of progressed and developed over a period of time.
So it sounds like it was one of those initial, like you said, a big sports fan, and you had that moment. We'll call it your eureka moment, and then it kind of a drip process. So you did not pull an Archimedes, did you, when you discovered the Archimedes principle?
I had taken a shower because after I took the shower, I ran out in the streets, and people said, "You no longer or you don't Rika."
Okay.
So anyway, and also we're talking about the fact that I had an opportunity to see a lot of sports over a period of time. I've been lucky to be able to see in person a lot of the Heisman Trophy winners. It just happened to be quite a few of them attended OU, but Billy Sims, Barry Sanders, who was OSU, Steve Owens, who was a runner at OU, and he won the Heisman, and then Sam Bradford, Kyle Murray, and quarterback Baker Mayfield. I've had a chance to see all those players in person, kind of see them develop, and that also whetted my interest in pursuing this project. Interestingly enough, I mean, Billy Sims, Steve Owens, and Barry Sanders, I think those are the three that subsequently wound up playing for the Lions for a period of time. And of course, Barry Sanders had the most successful career of all those successful pro career. And that's about it.
Yeah, when everybody listening to the show right now that's been listening to it for a while knows that when you say Barry Sanders, they're almost probably rolling their eyes because they know what's coming when I talk about how Barry Sanders is like the reason why I was such a fan of the NFL growing up as a kid. And I was going to be Barry Sanders till, well, known as Barry Sanders.
Right. I was going to be Norm Van Brocklin until the other pointed out that I didn't have an arm and I didn't have any speed and no eyesight.
Oh, you don't need any of that stuff to play. What are you talking about, right? Going back to the Lions. So I know you mentioned growing up in the northern Detroit and everything. I go on your website, and this is more recently, right on the shop. It must have been a recent poster you put up there, the 1957 Detroit Lions championship poster. Uh, what about the oldest ticket that you have, or post program, or anything on the site?
The oldest one that I'm aware of is a 1876 program from a game between Yale and Harvard in 1876. And that is an interesting ticket for a lot of different reasons. One is the fact that Teddy Roosevelt went to that game, who subsequently became president, but he was a freshman at Harvard and he attended that game. It was the second meeting between Harvard and Yale. First time they met was in 75, and then they had their second game in 1876. The other interesting thing is that individual by the name of Walter Camp played on Yale, and he was a freshman, and he later became known as the father of American football because he was instrumental in getting the rules changed over a period of years. And an interesting story when he went out, and back then American football was basically on that program. You'll notice the football is almost round. It looks like a soccer ball, and the rules were very well. I should say rugby rules are very, very similar to rugby, but the ball is very round and everything, and the low scoring games. I think that particular game, Yale won, I believe, 1-0, and their season, the various games. Harvard played 4 games that year. During the 76 calendar year, Yale played 3. And then they had an expanded notion of what a season was. They played their 4th game in April of 1877. And I think Yale was undefeated that year. They probably declared themselves national champions. I don't know about that. But the other funny story, Walter Camp only weighed about 150 pounds, and allegedly the Harvard captain looked at everyone and said, he's not going to play, is he? He's like a baby. He's going to get hurt. And so that was the beginning of his the football career for Walter Camp. And he was instrumental in developing the rules and everything. I think I mentioned he actually died in 1925 when he was attending a rules convention meeting, and he went to take a nap between sessions and passed away in his sleep. So he was a diehard fan right to the very end. And Teddy Roosevelt always was interested in football. He's probably a big hunter. He's a big outdoorsman. He liked to go hunting and, have a rugged lifestyle. And he was always a big football fan. And he, in effect, helped save it because in 1905, there was a big controversy about abolishing football because like 18 people died that year, I believe, something playing football. So they developed rules, had a rules committee, and they abolished the flying wedge and some of these things that were getting people seriously injured. So Roosevelt had called all the representatives from Harvard, Yale, Princeton to the White House, and they developed that. He said, "There's a problem here. We gotta try to fix it." And then the following winter, they had a meeting of about 62 colleges or so that came up with some initial rules and changes. But I think that's the oldest ticket we have, or the oldest program is that 1876 one.
That's the first time, and maybe I found it in my research, so Walter Camp was the first episode on the Football History Dude podcast back when I used to do solo episodes where I did not interview style. I may have picked up on that, but that is interesting. It's reminiscent of when Burt Bell passed away, watching his 2 favorite teams play as a commissioner.
I hadn't heard that. That was unfortunate, I guess.
Well,
but if you're gonna go, that's the way to go, right? Doing what you love.
Well, and if he passed away during a nap, that's also one of those where it's not, he didn't have to suffer.
Yeah.
But I also, so you mentioned Walter Camp, Teddy Roosevelt, and of course there were some others there. I think even maybe Naismith was there, or was that a later? That might have been later. But I'm just curious that in those moments when people actually realize, wow, there's a lot of heavy hitters in this room. Like nowadays, it's a little watered down because everyone knows how many followers a person has or how much money they make. But back then, I just wonder what it took to feel or realize this is like a huge moment that's going to shift things forward.
Right. I don't know if they know it at the time exactly. If I'm following your train of thought, I don't know if the participants actually know what a big change is going to occur, or what a big impact they're going to have on the game. But it's amazing the development of the sports. And then, when professional sports came in, I can remember in the early 50s where professional football was just, there's just very few cities involved at that point in time. Um, Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New York. And a lot of the major cities would have two teams in either football or baseball, whatever it might be. Um, Baseball was always the big sport professionally up to the 60s or so. And then I think NFL really made a lot of headway. That's interesting, too, also how the popularity of professional sports has changed over time. I remember when I was a kid watching basketball, I thought, I'm not sure about this. But I had grown up watching baseball and then football and then basketball was sort of like an add-on. But over the years, basketball is so fast-paced and everything, it's really enjoyable to watch. And part of it was the style of the game has changed. Back in the 50s, everything, a lot more defense was played in basketball. So it's interesting over time how the sports, each individual sport, has kind of developed and changed over a period of time. An example being the introduction of the forward pass in these games. No longer had any games 1-0 and 3-0 and that sort of thing.
Yeah, another partner I remember show on the network is called Basketball History 101. And I've been, I don't know, for lack of better terms, binge listening to his episodes. And recently I listened to the one that described how goaltending used to not be illegal. So it was just they'd hire the tallest guy. And then there was also, after every made shot, they would have a tip off. Just imagine stopping the play every for a tip off.
That would be time consuming. Of course, some of the earlier basketball games were pretty low scoring too.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember, did they implement the rule? I can't remember whether it was this player at Oklahoma State, Kirkland, or whatever his name was. I don't think it was Wilt Chamberlain that they made that change. I'm not real sure, but I know what you're talking about, where they put in a thing of goaltending. And it may have been due to one of these 7-foot players in the 40s. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't recall the specifics of the episode because like I said, I've been listening to so many, but it's stuck in my mind. That plus then the fact that I can't recall the famous player's name at the moment, but the blocked shot was frowned upon for a while, where if you left your feet, you were considered a poor defensive player. But then this one guy golly, I can't remember the basketball player's name.
Was it Bill Russell?
It may have been Bill Russell. I don't know for sure, but along those lines, yeah.
Well, we were talking about the Lions and that program. I think where they were world champions in '57, and one of the real treats I had was watching the Lions in the 1950s playing on TV or listening to them on the radio, and they had some really really good teams in the early 50s. And of course, they won the championship in '57. And maybe you can help me out here. There's 2 other years in the early 50s that they won. I want to say.
For some reason, I want to say 53 and 54, but I don't for sure recall it. Yeah.
But when growing up there, and the Lions used to practice over at a private school called Cranbrook. And during the summer, some of the kids, including me, would go over there and watch the Lions practice, and it was a completely different atmosphere. People wandering around, getting autographs. All they required you to do is when they were actually scrimmaging or running plays or running drills, they had little ropes. They didn't want you wandering over on the wrong side of the rope while they're actually doing something. But if they're just sitting around or standing around taking a break, you're free to run out there and try to get an autograph or whatever you could from them. So that was a lot of fun. That was a treat. And of course, Bobby Lane, who was a quarterback, it's kind of interesting in that 57 championship game. I was always a big Bobby Lane fan, and he and the coach at the time, a guy by the name of Ray Parker earlier, or what was his name? Buddy Parker, where his nickname was Buddy. But he and Bobby Lane, and Buddy Parker wasn't coaching in 57, but prior to that, he and Lane had kind of perfected a 2-minute drill. And so a lot of the memories I have is the Lions being behind in the fourth quarter and 2 minutes left or a minute and a half left. And Bobby Lane was able to move down the field and score and win. And the other thing that's kind of interesting, that year that they won the championship, I think they were 8-4. But the year before, they had been blown out by the Browns in a championship game, or 2 years before. And so this was kind of revenge factor when they won against Cleveland in 57 to claim the championship.
Yeah, I had Gene Cronin, who was on that 57 championship team.
Oh, was he on your program?
Yeah, it was quite some time ago, but he had some very cool stories about in the locker room, the head coach and everything. And you mentioned growing up in the 50s. What's the earliest time frame that you can recall watching or listening to games?
The first thing, two things. The very first thing I can remember, I was a big Howdy Doody fan, but I remember one Saturday morning, I was pretty young, really young actually. I remember one Saturday morning on an old RCA little 12-inch screen or something portable with rabbit ears and all this kind of stuff. And you watch the test patterns for a while until you get a headache. But the first game I can remember seeing on TV was a Princeton game. And they were playing, I don't know who they were playing, but it was an Ivy League game. Princeton was playing some team, and it was in the snow. And I was smitten. Princeton had these little stripes on their uniforms, like to represent a tiger, and that's something I had to have. I had to have a sweater with stripes on it. That was one thing I remember. And then I remember going to a Detroit Tiger, Philadelphia Athletics baseball game. Year, I can't remember, probably about 52 or so. Went to that and enjoyed that. Of course, I was getting antsy after a while. I was so small, like, how about another hot dog and a Coke or something? But those are the
Tiger
two
Stadium?
earliest.
Or Briggs
It was
Stadium?
Briggs Stadium.
Okay.
Man, it was called Briggs Stadium. And then I guess they renamed it Tiger Stadium. I guess they have demolished that.
I think they did when they put in Comerica Park. I don't recall though.
I don't know whether it's still existing or whether they turned it down.
I'm not sure where it was. I was too young to really know for sure. I didn't pay attention like the location because I wasn't driving when Comerica Park came into existence. So I didn't, as a kid, didn't really pay attention enough of that. But that's cool. You have a lot of old memories that can kind of relate to some stuff that I may have heard my dad or grandpa talk about in this local area.
I can remember playing football in my front yard with a cardboard helmet.
Yeah, at that point, what's the point?
Big old ball had like an elastic strap on it and a cardboard helmet.
Having a cardboard helmet's almost worse because then you have the illusion of protection.
Right, that's true.
Speaking of illusion of protection, and I'm sure they didn't have much back then compared to what we do now. How about let's get into some of the tickets or programs that you have on your site.
Sure.
You mentioned 1927 Ohio State versus Michigan football game. Why is that significant for you?
Well, that is the earliest. Well, we may have an earlier ticket, but that was the year that University of Michigan, that game, University of Michigan versus Ohio State, 1927. Was the dedication game, official dedication of the new stadium for University of Michigan, which big house or whatever. They, I want to say the attendance for that Ohio State Michigan game in 27 was like 85,000 or thereabouts. And I read, which was a big crowd. I think I read someplace it was 3 times the population at that game, 3 times as many people there as the population of Ann Arbor back at that point in time.
Wow.
But that's a good game because that's a first official dedication of the stadium. I think they had played a couple of games, at least one earlier game that season, but it didn't have the big hoopla and everything that game did. And then we have a whole series of University of Michigan tickets going back to the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. Some of the early ones, they have a Wolverine on it. I know we have a ticket, Wolverine. University of Michigan against Harvard, and they have a large Wolverine imposed on top of the ticket. And some of the early tickets from the 20s, 30s, 40s are really well designed, and they're really pretty when you look at them, study them, and everything. Really good art. So we have a lot of University of Michigan tickets. One game that I thought was very, very interesting is we have a ticket for the 1969 Ohio State Michigan game that was played in Ann Arbor. Ohio State was going in with had a winning streak of like 22 games or something like that. They were ranked number 1. Bo Schembechler, I believe it was his first year, I think. And he had coached under Woody Hayes at Miami. He had played for Woody Hayes, I think. He was an assistant coach for Woody Hayes for a while. But Schembechler went over to University of Michigan, and they upset Ohio State. And that was the beginning of what has been referred to as the 10-year war, which is a series starting with that game in 69 and ending when Woody Hayes retired in about either 78 or 69, maybe whatever it was when he ran into that problem with was an Auburn player in a bowl game that Woody Hayes kind of, bumped or whatever. And one comment, a lot of these things happen, and things happen to Joe Paterno and Woody Hayes, and I think I read recently some sort of controversy with Schembechler. But in all of these things, it doesn't detract from what these guys have achieved. I mean, all of these people, like Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler, whomever it might be, Barry Switzer ran into a problem. It's still, I mean, we're all human, but the point is, all of these individuals accomplished a great deal, and are excellent coaches. But anyway, I like that 69 ticket for that reason. It's a pretty ticket. And another little factor that year, I had an opportunity to go to the Michigan-Missouri game earlier in the year, about 3 or 4 weeks before that, whatever the exact sequence was. So I went to that game and squeezed in like a sardine in Michigan Stadium. So 69 was an interesting year from the standpoint of the development of the rivalry between, and they were rivals before, but I mean, this real intense 10-year period where Schembechler and Woody Hayes were both coaching. And the series at that point in time, it was good. I mean, Michigan would be favored and Ohio State would win. Ohio State would be favored and Michigan would win. And it was like that for about a 10-year period, back and forth. So it was really interesting. Then we have a large number, like I said, of Michigan tickets. We also have, basically a large number of all teams.
Right.
Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas, Oklahoma, whole thing. But I always like that 69 ticket because it's a good ticket. It has a picture of I say picture, it's not a photo, it's a drawing of Michigan Stadium, and then they have pennants.
Which is real cool. Like you said, the drawings versus just taking photos of everything. And it's something that's been brought up on my show before about the Super Bowl programs, the posters, like the early ones compared to some of the more recent, where they feel like the early ones were by far and away better. Speaking of programs, something that you brought up too in our pre-interview was let's talk about the 1940s Notre Dame team programs tickets. I'll leave the floor to you for that.
Speaking of Notre Dame tickets, one of the tickets that I really, really like, there's a whole series of Notre Dame tickets during the 1940s, which I think are very interesting art. And they also represent a period of time where Notre Dame was just dominant in college football. Starting out, the first ticket I'd like to talk about in terms of Notre Dame is Arizona versus Notre Dame ticket from 1941. It has a drawing of a runner on the ticket, and it was an opening game, September 27th, 1941, and played in Notre Dame Stadium. What I like about all these old tickets, too, is looking at the prices. They make my little heart jump when I think about the prices on this. But it's kind of funny. Like this particular ticket, it's $2 for the game, and they had a tax of 20 cents on it. Now, what's interesting about this ticket, it was the first game that a coach by the name of Frank Leahy had coached in. And he had played under Newt Rockne in 1930-31 or so. He was a lineman. And he started out coaching. Well, I don't know if he didn't start out coaching. He started out as a head coach at Boston University a couple of years before he went to Notre Dame. Previous to that, he had been assistant coach at various places. And one thing that's kind of interesting, Leahy was the assistant coach. He was line coach at Fordham University when Vince Lombardi played there. And I don't know if you ever heard, Vince Lombardi is one of what they call the 7 blocks of granite or something, which they used to refer to the line people. With me, they would have called it, sandstone. But anyway, they were the being weak and soft.
Okay,
But,
yeah, I was going to follow up with a question for you to describe
okay.
that because I'm interested.
But anyway, it's kind of interesting that he had coached Vince Lombardi and went to Boston College and did real well while he was there. I don't know how many games he won. I think maybe 20 and lost 2. And that's why Notre Dame was real interested in him. And he won the national championship. They're undefeated in 1940 before he went to Notre Dame. But Leahy is kind of when you talk about Notre Dame coaches, you talk about Newt Rockne, you talk about Ara Parseghian, you talk about Lou Holtz. I may have omitted a few. But Leahy, when you look at this guy's record at Notre Dame, it's unbelievable. And he resigned after the 53 season, I believe, or 54 season due to health reasons. He was a young guy, too. He was really young when he got out of coaching. But what I'd like to do is this. So we have a whole series of tickets during that time period. But his record he coached at Notre Dame from 1941 to 1943. And then he went into the service, into the Navy during the war. And when he came out, he started back up again at Notre Dame in 46 and coached through 1953. What is very interesting about Leahy is he had a record of 107 victories, 13 losses, and 9 ties. There was a lot of ties back then before overtime. So he had a winning percentage of .864, which is a really high winning percentage. To give you an idea, Ara Parseghian's was .83. And I don't know how he stacks up winning percentage. I don't know how you figure that exactly. Maybe you can help me. I don't know how you figure winning percentages when you have ties thrown in there. To give you some idea, Newt Rockne had a record of 105 wins, 12 losses, and 5 ties. So Leahy actually had more wins than Newt Rockne. He won 107 games. Rockne lost 12. He lost 13. Now, the only difference is Rockne had 5 ties, Leahy had 9. So, I mean, he was an excellent coach. And I wish I had the years here where he won the, Leahy won the national championship in 46, 47, and 49. And it looks like maybe he won. I'd have to double check this. It looks like maybe he won it in 43 too. And of course, they give him credit for a national championship when he was at Boston College. He's just an excellent coach. I mean, a lot of people haven't heard of him, but he's an interesting character. He had a real flashy bow tie. He used to wear in a suit coat on the sidelines. So you can tell that doing research. It started out, I didn't know anything about the guy. I had heard about him. But looking at some of these tickets, I thought, who's the coach of this team? And then one thing leads to another. But I'm pretty impressed with that guy, as you can tell. As far as winning percentage, he had 6 undefeated seasons at Notre Dame, and according to my notes, he had 5 national championships. That's pretty doggone good. To walk away when he was in his 50s, he had to resign due to health reasons. I always thought that was interesting, and I like those tickets during that time period. They have good artwork on them, and they also have some historical significance for what a great coach he was.
Yeah, and you even mentioned in the middle there, he had a 2 or 3 year span where he's in the military too.
Right, right. Now, if someone corrects me on these national champions, but I may have given you too many. The notes have 4 national championships as coach, so I don't know if all 4 of those are Notre Dame or they include the other. The other interesting thing, he played on 2 national championship teams under Newt Rockne. So he had a very eventful football career. So that's a series of tickets I really, really liked during that time period. And of course, we have tickets going beyond that. Notre Dame, I mean, we have Notre Dame tickets all the way up to the 80s, as with all these teams.
Again, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you have tickets galore and everything. And one of the things we might want to get into is we play a little game on here that I've kind of started recently on the show called Rapid Round. But how about with you? I know you have a ticket to each one of these games of the century, we call it. You okay with going a little rapid round style with that?
Okay. Quick. Yeah. I have some notes here, and I got some of my own thoughts. And
okay, before we get into this, could you kind of explain to me what the games of the century is and what the criteria is?
There's numerous games of the century, in quotes. So the pundits and commentators and sports writers and fans look at certain criteria to determine what a game of the century is. It's not necessarily the best game, because certainly there can be some really, really exciting games. Like, who was the old announcer of the Lions? Was it Dan Patrick? I remember growing up, there was this Lions announcer who maybe announced the Tiger games too. But it seems like what was it, Dan Patrick?
Oh, geez, there's that name, but then there may be the one I'm thinking of is probably not from if you were growing up. Geez, what the heck's the guy's name now? But yeah, he recently he passed away recently.
So you think there's an age difference?
I'm not saying anything. I mean,
but I remember this announcer used to always say, we have when the Lions were playing the 49ers, I was listening to it on the radio. It was always, we have a cliffhanger at Kezar, which Kezar Stadium, that's where they're playing.
That reminds me of in my days watching Barry Sanders. I can't remember the gentleman's name, the announcer, but it was always, you'll never see a play like that again. That was incredible. And every play was like that with Barry.
Right. And then you see it a few minutes later. Well, Sanders was really a good back. I mean, outstanding. But anyway, there's various criteria to determine what a game of the century is. And some of them pan out, some don't pan out so well. But we have a lot of tickets for games that have been categorized as game of the century. And some of the criteria that the sports writers are going to look at is whether they are, how the teams are ranked, but preferably it's number one versus number two at the time. And I think what I read during the 20th century, number one played a number two team 31 times. But it's all not going to be a game of the century because sometimes those games are early in the season and the teams tank after that, And also early in the season, it's like the beginning of the 20th century. How to determine a game of the century, like in 1905? The century hadn't even occurred yet. But they look at the ranking of the teams, the type of players, if they're named players playing on the team, the history of the teams, how good they are. Certainly taxidermy Tech being undefeated, playing some, University of Ragamuffins. Even though they're both undefeated, they're not going to have the same glamour, the glitz, and all that. So it's a team's history, how they're ranked, where they have top players at the time, and all these tickets that I'm going to talk about. They would meet the criteria.
Okay, so now how about the first game, the 1945 Army versus Navy game?
Well, what was significant about that? Played in 1945, right after the war. The war ended in August of that year, victory over Japan. A lot of optimism. People were rabid, to get back. It's like not having to wear a mask anymore, only maybe 100 times better. And so the game was played on December 1st, and Harry Truman attended the game, who was the president at that time. Team Army was ranked number one. They had a record of 8-0. Navy had a record of 7-0 and one tie. Actually, it turned out to not be that close a game. Army jumped out to a lead early, I think maybe 14-0. They wound up beating Navy 32-12. Now, what's significant about that game? It was the game of the century at that time, prior to the game. Everyone thought of it as being the game of the century. The problem was Army had about the best team, one of the best teams ever in college football history. They had two Heisman Trophy winners. At the same time, you probably heard of Doc Blanchard, Glenn Davis. Blanchard, I believe, won the trophy in 45, the Heisman Trophy, the year of this game. And Glenn Davis, who was a halfback, Mr. Outside, came in second. The other thing about Army, they had a lot of, I don't understand fully the rules at that time, but they had very liberal transfer rules. And so the best players from a lot of different colleges came to Army for that 1 year, and they were like in a backup role. So, I mean, they had good players. I don't know that anyone could beat them, but they were like Glenn Davis averaged over 45 and 46, over 11 yards a carry. This guy who's a halfback. I've seen some films of him. He was fast. The coach, Red Blake, said he had like 5 gears he could shift into. So there wasn't a significant moment. That the key moment in that game was the fact that Army was so good. They were just outstanding. I don't know that anyone could have beaten them that year, and probably for several years after. Now I'm going to shift over real briefly, talking about the games of the century. It just so happens there's a game of the century the next year, which was between Army and Notre Dame. And that gets back to the coach we were talking about, Leahy. He had come back from service. He was the coach of Notre Dame now. Previous year, Army had beaten Notre Dame like 44-0 or something like that. Well, in this game, this was really built up. This is truly a game of the century. It was played at Yankee Stadium. Teams went back and forth. Now he had Blanchard was still playing. He was a Heisman winner. Glenn Davis won the Heisman that year. And Notre Dame quarterback was the guy by the name of Johnny Lujack. He won the Heisman in 47. So there's a lot of talent on the field. And they went back and forth, and all these guys were making great plays. Davis intercepted the ball, I think, or Lujack threw. Lujack tackled Davis when he was getting ready to have a breakaway run and score. And the game wound up a 0-0 tie. Now, you could say that was a hard-fought contest and very interesting. Notre Dame wound up, even though it was a tie, they awarded a national championship to Notre Dame. AP did that year. That was one of the national championships that Leahy.
So how about the next one, the 1966 Michigan State versus Notre Dame game?
That game was the 1966 Michigan State Notre Dame game. Interesting for a lot of different reasons. I was able to watch that on TV. It was a big game, and it's the way television and everything has changed over a period of time. At that point in time, it was only regionally telecast, and the reason for that, the rules at that point in time, the contract with whoever the network was, NBC or whoever had it, they could only televise a team one time nationally. And Notre Dame had already been televised at the first game of the year against Purdue. The game was regionally telecast only, but here was billed as the game of the century. Well, fans went berserk, and a lot of them wrote in. So finally, the network relented, and they had tape delay broadcast on the West Coast and in the South. But other than that, just people around the Midwest were able to see that game. Again, Michigan State had a real good defensive lineman. He played in the pros, Bubba Smith. The coach was Eric Parsegian on Notre Dame. And what was interesting about this game, one of the starting backs, I don't know if it was a fullback for Notre Dame, he was getting off the train in East Lansing, and he slipped and hurt his shoulder, and he couldn't play. And then the starting quarterback for Notre Dame was knocked out of the game in the first quarter by Bubba Smith. So Notre Dame was kind of playing short-handed. Michigan State jumped out to a 10-0 lead. Notre Dame came back to tie it, and there wasn't a lot of time left. Notre Dame had their ball. They got the ball on the 43-yard line with just a few minutes left. And Eric Parsegian is widely criticized for this. He elected to play for a tie. It was tied up at that time 10-10. And he elected to play it safe and didn't try to score, didn't try to do anything that would lose the ball, or he didn't, attempt to field goal. Now, he was roundly criticized. But if you say, there's different perspectives. Some people say you win. Like at one time, I think Tom Osborne was playing a bowl game against Miami, Nebraska, and they went for a win at the end, and they weren't able to complete a 2-point conversion. They could have kicked an extra point to win. And to tie, he went for the win, and they lost. The national championship goes down the drain. Well, in this particular case, Parsegian played it safe. And they wind up with a 10-10 tie. Next week, he went out to Southern Cal, and he beat Southern Cal like 52-0. Worst defeat Southern Cal had ever had. So Notre Dame wound up being number one at the end of the year. What's really interesting about this, I think, and I read this book, it's something like 3 Rings or something, but it's about the Alabama football team under Bear Bryant during this time period, which would have been 64, 65, 66. They were incensed because they were undefeated. And I think in a lot of the polls, Alabama wound up number 3. They were left out in the cold. But they were undefeated. And they figured, well, Notre Dame played for a tie. We didn't. We're undefeated. Why aren't we national champs? But in hindsight, you can't criticize for it. I guess you can if you say you should always try to win. It doesn't matter. And there was a lot of criticism. People would say, tie one for the Gipper. That was story, 1-1 for the Gipper. They would say, tie one for the Gipper. And the other thing people would say was, what was it? Rather than the Fighting Irish, they had this moniker of the Tying Irish. So, but, it depends on your perspective. Eric Parsegian, you can say, well, he wound up winning a national championship. And you have to look at it from a standpoint, too. Maybe they were the best team because starting back got hurt getting off the train, and the quarterback got knocked out in the first, And he may have been unsure about, hey, we don't have a starting quarterback. He may throw an interception or whatever. So all that stuff on hindsight. But at the time, I remember there was a lot of furor about the the whole scenario there. So that I think was an interesting outcome of that game in '66.
So how about the next year? We'll go to the next game of the century, 1967, UCLA versus USC.
Okay, well, have you noticed a pattern here? There's a game of the century about every year. No.
Seems like it, yeah.
Well, that game was very interesting because, again, that I think was one of those games that really lived up to its hype. It was played on November 18th, 1967. UCLA, they were number one in polls, and one of the polls, and number four in AP. And USC was number one in one poll and number two in the other. But UCLA was 7-0-1, and Southern Cal was 8-1. The game had a lot of fanfare. O.J. Simpson was a back. You probably heard of him, right? They had a quarterback who won the Heisman on UCLA by the name of Gary Beaven. But the game was back and forth, and it was tied 14-14 in the fourth quarter. Gary Beaven, UCLA, threw a touchdown pass, and UCLA went up 20-14 because they had missed an extra point at that time. Yeah, the extra point was blocked, so it was 2014. There wasn't much time left in the game, and Southern Cal quarterback noticed that the linebackers for UCLA were dropping back for a pass play. And so he checked off, and he gave the ball to O.J. And O.J. Simpson ran for 68 yards, 64 yards. Southern Cal wound up winning 21-20. Now, UCLA went on and became number one at the end of the year after the bowl game. But Simpson, Beaven, who was a quarterback, won the Heisman that year on UCLA. O.J., who was running back for Southern Cal, won the Heisman the next year. Now, Keith Jackson, who was a commentator, TV broadcaster, and everything for ABC, he later claimed that was the best game he had ever seen in person.
Yeah, O.J. Simpson would be another one of those guys that, like you said, he had some unfortunate events, but that still doesn't take away from how good of a player he was.
It doesn't take away from the athlete and everything that he was. Heck, I made a few mistakes in my life. Well, maybe two. No.
Yeah, mine's on one hand too. But speaking of that, so I did not grow up in an era where I could watch him live. What was the hype when he came into the league, and how much better was he than the next running back at that time?
I think he had to be one of the most outstanding backs ever because he had speed and he had size. He could run over people. He could run around people. And I believe, I don't know if he started out with Buffalo Bills, but he wound up playing for the Buffalo Bills. I don't know if O.J. started out with the Bills or not. He had a very, very, very successful pro career too. And he was a good back. Now, Beaven, this guy I was talking about, quarterback, Heisman winner, he did not have a successful pro career. He was drafted. He went to a couple of teams off and on, and he wound up, I think some team tried to make him into a wide receiver. The problem was, I think he was supposed to go to LA Rams, and they had Roman Gabriel at the time who was a quarterback, and he was pretty established. Then he went to another team, and they had a quarterback pretty set, and so they tried to make him into a wide receiver, and he only lasted a couple of years. So just winning a Heisman Trophy certainly doesn't guarantee any kind of success in the pros, although O.J. had a very, very, very successful pro career. Just fast, size, speed. I think it's probably a really good back. He's different back from the guy we were talking about, Sanders. It was more like all over the place. He could spin and turn and shift, all the time when he was running.
He was the kind of guy that, back when they had the tube TVs, you had to hit it on the side because you're like, I'm not sure if this TV's working right because he's over there. Then the next minute he's over here.
That's right.
Speaking of
disappointing when he just retired out of the blue, didn't he? I mean, with no
stop taking that dagger and putting it in me and twisting. If we can leave that one alone. We can pretend that never happened. But yeah, that I was a youngster, and they had training camp at our local town during that time frame near me, similar to you watching the Lions in the day. And I remember when he retired again. I've told this story many times in here. I like it rocked my world, like, because I had only known Barry Sanders my entire life,
Right.
as a Lions fan, until he wasn't there. And it rocked my world. But speaking of rocking world, these games of the century, like you said, it seems like it's almost every year. 1969, Arkansas versus Texas. What happened there?
And that was a good game. That was the game of the century. That was the same year, '69. I think I told you before. I went to the Missouri-Michigan game early in the year. Got drafted. Had to drafted early. Had to report for the Army, and I think end of October. So for a few weeks there during basic training, I didn't get a chance to see a lot of football. But this particular one, and before I went into the service, a friend of mine and I drove down to Texas to watch the Texas OU game, which was fun. Then we both went our respective ways. He was in the Navy and went over to Vietnam, and I went into the Army. But getting back, it's very eventful. 1969, Texas, Arkansas. I did get a chance to see that game on TV. It was billed as a game of the century. It was really significant. Texas was ranked number 1. Arkansas was ranked number 2. They both were 9-0. Texas coach legendary Darrell Royal. Arkansas, Frank Broyles, his famous coach. They both had good teams. And again, we're talking about the history. What makes a game of the century? History. Like Michigan, Ohio State, you could easily see them playing a game of the century. Or UCLA, U.S.A. Rivalries, history, good teams generally. In this case, Texas and Arkansas had won the old Southwestern Conference Championship like 8 out of the last 10 years. They had shared it. Arkansas was national champions, I want to say in 1964. Texas was a national champion in 1963, I believe. So they had all this going for them during that decade of the 60s. So it was a big game. And national television, what's his name? Billy Graham came to give the invocation. President Nixon flew in on Air Force One and landed someplace, and they took a helicopter to the game. And it lived up to its billing. Arkansas jumped out. Texas fumbled the ball like 6 times. They were running wishbone. That's kind of a good offense when it's clicking, but this was rainy. It was foggy. It was all this stuff. I'm not making excuses for them, but they fumbled a lot. It's high-risk offense. And Arkansas got ahead 14-0. So Texas kind of clawed their way back into the game. They scored. It was 14-0. Texas scored the first play of the fourth quarter. Darrell Royal had already decided he was going to go for 2 points the first time Texas scored because he didn't want the game ending as a tie. He was probably thinking of Notre Dame, Michigan State that happened 3 years earlier. So he went for 2. They converted it. And ultimately, it stayed at 14-8 until late in the fourth quarter. Texas got their ball, and I think they wound up there on the 43-yard line, 40-yard line, something like that. And it was 4th and 3 yards to go for the whole shooting match. And they're down 14-8. So the question is, I guess for most people out there, what would you have done in that case? You're on your 43. You got 4th down, 3 yards to go. What are you going to do? You're going to go for the first down, try a run, try a short pass. Royal opted to go for a long bomb, a long running pass play. And Street, from what I heard, the Texas quarterback, Street said, looked at me, you sure you want to do this? And he yelled out, yeah, I want to do it. So he went out. They threw the ball. It was like a 43-yard gain or something. They the ball down in Arkansas's 13-yard line. They were able to punch it in. Scored 15-14. There's some time left. Arkansas went down the field. There's about a minute left. They're on Texas 40-yard line, and they try to pass play. If they made that pass, they would have gotten the ball in around the 20 or so. Could have kicked a field goal. Now, unfortunately, it was intercepted. But that was a game back and forth, high-powered teams, excellent coaches, good players, and that truly, I think, deserved a game of the century. All these did, in my opinion, except maybe the one we talked about, Navy Army. But that was hindsight. That was after the fact. Oh, one thing, really funny story about the 69 Texas-Arkansas game. Penn State was undefeated. It was sort of like the situation Alabama had been in when Michigan State and Notre Dame. Alabama was undefeated. Why aren't we national champions? Penn State was undefeated. Now, Nixon had decided ahead of time that whoever won, he was going to declare them national champions. And he had a little plaque made up. I remember seeing this. He had a little plaque made up he was going to present to the coach and everything, which he did. So Nixon kind of declared Texas to be the national champions that year. And of course, you can imagine how the sports writers felt, how all the people who voted on who's the national champion, how the fans all over the country, thought this is appropriate for the president to declare the national championship. So, and the other little interesting thing about this, Texas went on to beat Notre Dame in the Cotton Bowl, 21-17 that year. So that's good. That's okay. But Penn State also beat Missouri in the Orange Bowl, and they were undefeated at the end of the year. Again, according to Nixon, Texas was already national champions. The other interesting little tidbit here is Penn State had an opportunity. They had received an invitation to play the winner of the Texas-Arkansas game in the Cotton Bowl, but they declined because those two teams were all white. At that point in time, Penn State objected on the fact that neither Arkansas or Texas had any black players on the squad, and so they objected to that on those grounds. A little funny story in 1973, Joe Paterno, this always bugged him. He was not named as national champion. He was giving his speech in 1973, and he said, I just don't understand it. Nixon knew so much about college football in 1969, but he doesn't know anything about Watergate in 1973. And that was, fiasco with a break-in, Watergate and everything. So I think the Texas-Arkansas game fits into that category of being game of the century. One of them.
Yeah, sounds like you said many games of the century. So we have one more last game of the century for your tickets. 1971, Oklahoma versus Nebraska went down. What happened there?
Well, in a nutshell, I had an opportunity to see that game in person, and what I derived from the whole experience. I was down at Austin, Texas at the time. My brother was able to get a ticket. We came up for Thanksgiving and everything. My wife and I went to that game of the century. And what I learned was it can get very, very, very cold in Oklahoma at the end of November. And I had come up wearing a sport coat. I just had a real light sport coat. And keep in mind, it's 71. It was cool to wear a turtleneck and a sport coat. And I was freezing my butt off the whole game. But it was an excellent game. Nebraska was ranked number 1. Oklahoma was number 2. Nebraska had the top defense in the country at that time. Oklahoma had the top offense. They were averaging like 483 yards a game rushing. They had a wishbone. They had perfected the wishbone at that point in time. I know some of these games are before your time, so you wonder, well, who are these people? But
some of them.
Okay. Well, Greg Pruitt, who had a good pro career in Cleveland, was on the OU team at that time as a halfback. Jack Milton was a quarterback. They had a good team. Now, unfortunately, Nebraska was better, but it was a game back and forth. Oklahoma was ahead. Of course, I was rooting for OU, but they were ahead with about 7 minutes left, and Nebraska got a kickoff and consumed the whole time, except for about a minute and a half left. They took all that time to have a 73-yard drive, and they went in for the winning touchdown. I think the score wound up to be 35-31. Again, that lived up to the billing of the game of the century. Again, it's like debates over who was a national championship before they had the playoff system. And so there's a lot of games of the century, but not too many. I mean, there's only about 3 others that people generally consider to be games of the century. And some we don't have the tickets. There's about 3, I think, that are still outstanding out there. We're going to try to recover.
So again, the ones that we just discussed, you actually have these tickets on the website for someone.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And one of them I dearly love, but we can talk about that unless you want to talk about like now.
So which one do you dearly love? Which one strikes the heartstring for you?
That ticket that I would really, I'm not going to give up any body part for it, but a ticket I would really love to have is the 1946 Notre Dame Army ticket that wound up in a 0-0 tie. Because I from what I've heard and what I've seen on our old films, that was just, everyone concedes that was a great game. And it lived up to its billing. And it was sort of like the Notre Dame Michigan State game, although I can't say that. The difference in the Notre Dame Army 1946 game, one of the teams didn't lose 2 of their key players before the game. I was going to say Michigan State, Notre Dame in 66 ended up in a 10-10 tie, and Army, Notre Dame was 0-0. But both those teams in 46, they were at their full complement. They had all their players. They didn't have anyone injured. That, key Heisman winner. So that's the game I'd really like to see. Plus, if you're talking about the atmosphere, the glamour, 1946, war being over. Still, I mean, it's been over for about a year, but a lot of optimism in Yankee Stadium. That's a game I would like to see, and would like to have a ticket.
Speaking of tickets, so you obtain or acquire these tickets physically, and then that's what you use for your artwork?
Exactly. Tickets, programs, scorecards, magazines, advertisements, media guides, all the historic artwork we can get our hands on. For example, I learned of a guy over in Wichita Falls that had some programs, Texas A&M, Texas, various things like that. So I traveled over there to review them and said, well, yeah, we can use this, we have this, we use that. And so we acquired, maybe 8 or 9 items at that time, not one thing. So through, garage sales, through estate sales, through internet, purchases, things of that nature, acquired those.
You're like the Indiana Jones of sports ticketing, then.
Exactly. And I've been mistaken for that Indiana Jones guy before.
Oh, striking resemblance for sure, no doubt. Put a hat on and that. What's that called with the little bullwhip?
Yeah. Actually, his father in that one play, Sean Connery played his father in one. So that's the guy that probably most resemble when he was much older.
Okay, so I asked this question to Joe Horrigan. He was a longtime curator, I guess, Mr. Everything for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. If you, and I don't, this is not like an omen or anything for you, but say you at your place of wherever you store all these items and you were leaving the building, and again, I don't want it to burn on fire, but you could pick one item and you're running out the door, which one would you pick?
That would be difficult for me to determine that. I'd grab a handful.
So you're gonna cheat just like my previous guest.
I'm gonna grab a handful. One of the ticks we haven't talked about that I really the name of our company, I don't know if we've talked about this, is 47 Straight LLC. It's a limited liability company. It's called 47 Straight. Row One brand is our brand that we sell all the products under and market and all that kind of stuff. 47 Straight, we got that name from the fact that Oklahoma had a 47 game winning streak. I thought that'd be interesting. We have the tickets for the start of this streak against Texas back in 1953. And we have the ticket for the last game of the 47. We have a Missouri-Oklahoma ticket. Oklahoma went up to Missouri, played Missouri Tigers up in Columbia. And we have that ticket. Okay, so we have bookended the first victory and the 47th victory. That's a 47th streak. Unfortunately, I shouldn't say fortunately, because I haven't seen it. We also have the 48th game where Notre Dame beat Oklahoma to end their winning streak. And that was in Norman, November of 1957. I was watching a game on TV and my little heart was pumping. And I believe this is true. Did you ever hear about a guy by the name of Nick Petrosani? I think he played on the Lions. I believe he was a fullback for the Lions. I need to check on it. Nick Petrosani threw the winning block. The game was back and forth, 0-0. One of these deals where Notre Dame gets the ball and just, you can't stop them. They're grinding it out, and got down to the goal line without much time left. And I think Oklahoma was expecting a run up the middle, so they kind of stacked their defense to that. And Notre Dame went outside. Nick Petrosani was a fullback that had the lead block that allowed the runner to score. And I'm almost positive Nick Petrosani played for the Detroit Lions after that. So those are interesting tickets. And the end of the 47 game winning streak, which is the longest in college football, Notre Dame. And the other interesting thing, Notre Dame points out the fact that they were the last team to beat Oklahoma before that streak began. Now what happened in 53, Notre Dame beat Oklahoma in the first game. It was like 28-21, I don't know the score. It's a pretty close game. And then the next week, Oklahoma tied Pittsburgh 7-7, and then they went on their 47-game win streak. I had mentioned before, starting this thing, I was looking at 56. I like the 56 Oklahoma Notre Dame ticket because Oklahoma won 40-0. That was an interesting game because Paul Hornung was quarterback for Notre Dame, and he won the Heisman Trophy. Even though Notre Dame had a terrible season, like 2-8, but Paul Hornung was a good player. And, what are you going to do if you're a real good player and not so good a team? But he did win that. Of course, he went on to play at Green Bay Packers under Lombardi. So,
yeah, I didn't realize the Golden Boy was a quarterback in college.
Yeah, he's quarterback, kicker. Because what did he play halfback at for Packers? Yeah, I mean he was good. Now he got intercepted like 4 times that game, but whatever. But again, there's a lot of talent on the field. Hornung won the Heisman. Johnny Majors, who's back on Tennessee, famous back, he came in second. But Oklahoma had a number of players that kind of divided a vote up. Tommy McDonald, you may have heard of him. He was a real good receiver. He went to play for Philadelphia Eagles, and real good receiver for them. But he was a halfback. They had Quentin Thomas. He went to play for L.A. Jerry Tubbs was a linebacker, real good. He went to Dallas and was an assistant coach under Landry. So there's a lot of talent on the field. I think that was, I did want to talk a little bit about the 47 straight, where we got the name for that. Now, obviously, it doesn't have in our opinion, it doesn't have the punch that Row One does for marketing and stuff like that. So we developed that brand. And significance, you're Row One, you're up front at all the sporting events.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said it just like that because that's a good transition because Real One brand being up front, having these old tickets to be able to reminisce being back there at the stadium, if you're watching on TV. We're going to skip over the NFL stuff because we've talked a lot about college, and we're going to dive right into this guy, the DeLorean, similar to Real One brand, which gives you the chance to go back in time and reminisce and relive. But I'm going to give you this question. It's a little bit unique because of the nature of your company. What's the one ticket, program, or artwork in all of human sporting history that you wish you could use my DeLorean to go back and steal an original copy of?
Well, what I would prefer, but I don't think it's going to happen. I would like to see the Lions versus the Christians in the Coliseum back in the early times, but I don't know if they have any tickets or anything for that. So absent that, I think if I had any choice of any current ticket, could you explain it again? Anything I could go back to, any sporting event.
You go back to any sporting event in human history, and even the gladiators, I'm pretty sure they had some form of,
I probably had some problem. Yeah, probably wouldn't really be in, want to go there. What I would like to have been able to see, and I don't remember the details, but probably I know the event. I don't know who was playing whom, but Stan Musial. When I was a kid, I remember going home reading a newspaper, and I believe, hit 5 home runs in one day and a doubleheader, and I was pretty impressed with that. Now, unfortunately, I don't recall the team they were playing, but it was the St. Louis Cardinals. Would have been a game in, I'm thinking it would have been a game in about 1954 or 55, probably 55. But that would be what I would enjoy seeing because I was always a big Stan Musial fan.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Like you said, something you grew up listening or watching and you really enjoyed it. Here's something I grew up. My name is Arnold, actually, not just Arnie. So Arnold Schwarzenegger is one of my fans, even though he wasn't really that good of an actor. A movie he was in, The Last Action Hero. Did you ever see that movie?
I did.
Okay, so you know the premise where the golden ticket and the boy went into the movie. Okay, so we're gonna have that same situation with you, similar to a DeLorean question. You can pick one ticket that you have possession of, and you can do that ticket thing, and you can be live for that moment. Which one are you going to?
I think I would probably like two. Am I allowed to pick two? One. Let's start out.
You own the tickets. You can do whatever you want.
I would like to see the game where Stanford played Cal, and they had trying to think here. Stanford went ahead with about 8 seconds left or something like that, kicked a field goal. And it was 1982, Stanford, Cal. And in fact, they call it the play. Stanford was ahead, and they had 4 seconds left. It kicked off to Cal. And there was a lot of shenanigans. I don't remember all of it. Stanford got a penalty for celebrating because they went ahead, so they had to kick off 15 yards shorter. Kicked it to California, and California wound up lateraling 5 times. And they wound up scoring and winning. Probably a lot of people have seen that playback if they didn't see it in person or on TV at the time. They played that back a lot where the Stanford band came on the field and various fans and that, and so the Cal players kind of running over these fans and people and band people to score. And after it was over, I think the officials huddled, and one of them said, the head referee said, "Did anyone blow a whistle?" No. Did anyone see any penalties or anything? No, I didn't see. Okay, touchdown. And so Cal won that game with like 0 time left on the clock. But I mean, it was to kick off with about 4 seconds left, and there's similar games that have happened before. Wasn't it Auburn, Alabama, where something happened last minute, tried a field goal or something? I'm trying to remember. And they wound up winning the last play of the game type of thing. But that Stanford Cal is just so bizarre. I'd like to see that in person. And I do have that ticket for that, so we'd definitely like to see that.
You don't want to be that band guy that got ran over, though, right? You want to be.
I don't want to do
Okay.
that. I'll tell you what. I'll be the guy who scored the winning touchdown.
There you go. Quantum leap style. We talked about that on the show, too.
You know what's interesting about the game? John Elway was the quarterback for Stanford.
Oh.
And it was an interesting game because Stanford was like 5-5, and there's some bowl representatives there. And if Stanford had won the game, they would have gone to a bowl game. And the other thing is, Cal Stanford is a tremendous rivalry. And they refer to it among themselves, alumni and fans of their schools. They call it the game, the big game. The big game is Cal Stanford every year. So that was a bizarre twist of that. Now, I had my fingers crossed or whatever I need to do. The other game I'd like to see is I would like to have seen the 1957 Cleveland Detroit Lions game where the Lions won. They really significantly beat Browns in that game. And Bobby Lane was hurt, and Tobin Rote, who had been acquired from Green Bay Packers at the beginning of the season, was quarterback. Tobin Rote was a good player, good quarterback. So I'd like to see those games. If you force me and twist my arm and I could only choose one, I would probably take the 59 Lions game world champions because that's the last time they'd won.
Yeah, you're talking to somebody.
Hope springs eternal.
What's that?
Oh, hope springs eternal.
Yeah, every year we drink the blue Kool-Aid and we get a new coach and everything. And then from there, we get to let our hearts, at least our hearts normally get broken early in the year. We don't have to wait to the playoffs and then lose it in the divisional or championship round. But enough kidding aside, and we've had a lot of fun today. With that, any last words of advice for the listener of the show, including maybe the mission of Row One brand?
Okay. Well, what Row One brand wants to achieve is to provide excellent sports art that has a historical flavor to it, and we want to make that readily available, a wide variety of artwork. If you want to call it vintage or retro or whatever tag you want to put on it, we want to provide that in high quality products. And we haven't gotten involved in a lot of that, but as far as the artwork, we have canvas, we have framed art, we have wooden signs, we have metal signs, we have acrylic artwork, all types of artwork, prints. And then in addition, we're trying to use these historic vintage images to create other products like apparel, phone cases, beach towels, just a wide variety of products that lend themselves to using some of these historic vintage retro graphics on them. And most of the items, it's amazing. And most of the things we acquire and we look into, we do it both ways. We go after certain things. But it's amazing how many of these things we acquire that then when we research, we say, good grief. Like an example, I purchased that 1982 California Stanford ticket we were just talking about where they, won at the end of the game. I bought that because the graphics, the drawing on that is just excellent. What attracted my attention, it was a centennial year for California football. And so it was significant. I looked at that, and then after I looked at it, I thought, Cal Stanford, and looked it up, and it just so happens that was the game that we were just talking about a little while ago. Now, some of the items I know, like 1957 Notre Dame, Oklahoma, I'm not going to pass on that. Might be willing to put a flak vest on or something. But what we want to do, we want to preserve sports history, much like you guys do on all your podcasts. And by the way, I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear on your show. And also, I've listened. You have like affiliated, I think. I don't know the exact structure, but you have about 20 other podcasts, I believe. And I've had an opportunity to listen to a number of those, the different podcasts and your podcasts, everything. The program is excellent. I really, really enjoy it. And what we're trying to do is some of the things you guys are doing in terms of trying to preserve sports history and honor the past.
There you go. Honor the past. I think Ray said it best. That's what we're trying to do here at the Sports History Network. We aim to create the headquarters of sports yesteryear, just as Ray aims to create the headquarters of nostalgic sports artwork. Again, to learn more about his company, you can head to the page for this episode on Sports History Network. The easiest way to get there is sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. That's ROWONE. And don't forget to sign up for the awesome giveaway from Ray and his team. You can do so by heading to sportshistorynetwork.com/contest. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football History Dude. To make sure you're the first to get the next episode, please subscribe on your podcast player of choice and head on over to thefootballhistorydude.com for the show notes and more information on the history of the NFL. And remember, dudes, where we're going, we don't need roads.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.